We welcome you to another Sunday School lesson. Sunday School is a blessing and gift from God. Our lesson is a shocking indictment which completes the Pharisees' rejection of Jesus. They appear to be holy, but they are filled with spiritual death. While they attempt to destroy Jesus, he warns his disciples to stay strong in persecution, knowing the kingdom of God is near. The Pharisees were a sect of Judaism, made up largely of laymen rather than priests or religious professionals. Their burden is a zeal to obey every minute law that God has given, and so please Him fully. Jesus agrees with the Pharisees about the resurrection of the dead, while the Sadducees, made up largely of priests and their followers, deny a resurrection of the dead. The Pharisees also believe in the existence of angels, as does Jesus. These Pharisees are not a little proud of themselves for their scrupulous observance of the law, and look down on other Jews as sinners who don't observe the law as carefully as they do. Our first verse says, "When Jesus had finished speaking, a Pharisee invited him to eat with him, so he went in and reclined at the table." Jesus is now around 30 years old, a widely acclaimed popular teacher, and he heals also. One of the prominent Pharisees in the local community begins to take an interest, and thought he would make an interesting dinner guest. Perhaps my friends and I can even teach him a thing or two about our deeper understanding of the law. Despite the Pharisees' antagonistic relationship with Jesus, they occasionally invite him to their homes to provoke him to speak about many things, to catch him in something he might say. The fact that they recline indicates this is a formal meal, and they are lying on couches around a table. Most likely, the doors are open, and people are standing quietly along the walls to hear the conversation. Verse 38 says, "But the Pharisee was surprised when he noticed that Jesus did not first wash before the meal." Pharisees follow the Mosaic law but add an extra biblical oral law. These traditions include specific instructions about daily life, such as ceremonially washing hands. They are so meticulous that they wash after leaving the marketplace, and wash eating implements even if they are not unclean. In this event, Jesus doesn't wash his hands, and the Pharisees notice this breach of the Mosaic law. Verse 39 says, "Then the Lord said to him, 'Now then, you Pharisees clean the outside of the cup and dish, but inside you are full of greed and wickedness.'" Jesus now responds. This metaphor is particularly appropriate. The Pharisees rinse their hands before a meal, but their hearts are still darkened, unclean. Jesus' reference to cleanse and clean follow the Pharisees' ceremonial interpretation. If an unclean insect fell onto a cup or plate, no Pharisaical tradition-abiding Jew would just wipe off the outside. A wooden bowl would be thoroughly cleaned and a ceramic bowl would be broken and thrown away, Leviticus 11:32-33. Jesus implies that these Pharisees are more concerned about how they look, how they're perceived by others, than how they really are. Jesus elaborates on his charge of greed and wickedness at other times. He warns the disciples that the scribes, the lawyers of the Pharisees, devour widows' houses, Luke 20:47. They value the money in the temple more than the temple itself, Matthew 23:16-22. And they keep money that should go to the care of their elderly parents by promising it to the temple, Mark 7:9-13. Verse 40 says, "You foolish people! Did not the one who made the outside make the inside also?" The Pharisees seem to think that what matters is their reputation, people seeing what they do, rather than who they really are. The Gospels give several examples, such as washing before they eat, washing after visiting the marketplace, and washing cups and pots and copper vessels and dining couches. They promise donations to the temple. They take the place of honor in the synagogue and expect reverence in the marketplace. They are so diligent that they tithe even the tiny leaves taken from herbs. What the people don't see is that the money they promise to the temple should be used for their elderly parents. They expect others to live as they do but do nothing to help. They not only ignore justice, but they also steal widows' homes. God made the inside of the person as well as the outside, but it is what we allow in our hearts that determines who we are. Verse 41 says, "But now as for what is inside you, be generous to the poor, and everything will be clean for you." Jesus explains the true nature of cleanness. The Pharisees wash as a way of ensuring they eat nothing unclean, including specks that may have stuck to their hands in the marketplace. But true spiritual uncleanness is in the heart, including theft, as of widows' homes and parents' support, and the false witness, slander, evil thoughts, and murder they will commit against Jesus. Jesus says, these types of acts are what defile a person. But to eat with unwashed hands does not defile anyone. The Pharisees publicly give alms, but they also steal from widows and neglect their parents. Jesus seems to be saying that alms need to come from a good and charitable heart, not a desire to look good. If the Pharisees can do that, it doesn't matter if they ceremonially wash their hands or tithe on the smallest of herbs. They will be clean, inside and out. Verse 42 says, "Woe to you Pharisees, because you give God a tenth of your mint, rue, and all other kinds of garden herbs, but you neglect justice and the love of God. You should have practiced the latter without leaving the former undone." Part of the Mosaic law requires 10% of one's produce be given to the priests and Levites in return for their service in the temple. The Israelites' observance of this requirement had been uneven throughout their history. Yet the Pharisees are very legalistic. Their outward shows of devotion to God mean nothing, however, because they abuse the very people from whom they seek approval. They burden the people with extra laws, but do not help them obey. They steal the homes of widows. And they promise money their parents need to the temple, thus both dishonoring their parents and looking good in front of the priests. God has a long history of teaching Israelites that material donations are worthless, unless they also give themselves. Sacrifice and offerings, celebrating feasts and prayers, and other religious performances are nothing without a broken and contrite heart, hands free from violence, and justice for the oppressed. Verse 43 says, "Woe to you Pharisees, because you love the most important seats in the synagogues and respectful greetings in the marketplaces." Luke 11 includes several stories of how the Jewish religious leaders reject Jesus. Even though he has already healed the blind, deaf, and mute, healings specifically related to the Messiah in Isaiah 35 5-6, some of the scribes and Pharisees demand even more miraculous signs from him. Here, we see another way their thinking is twisted. What they value most is the praise of men. The Pharisees do all their deeds to be seen by others. For they make their phylacteries broad and their fringes long. The disciples are to obey and serve quietly, with no fanfare, so their reward will be from God, not onlookers. These religious leaders like being the main act in a religious show. They like to see flashy miracles, though they don't trust the power behind them. It's stunning to think they watched Jesus cast out a demon, then called him unclean because he didn't rinse off his hands before he eats. It is possible to have a good, godly reputation and be respected in both church and in the community, while remaining humble. We can obey God and do good while keeping a broken and contrite heart. We must remember that everything good in us is from Jesus. We deserve neither the good he gives us nor the good he puts in us. It should not be our goal to win adoration for what Jesus has done for us, but to serve others in his name and to his glory. Our final verse says, "Woe to you, because you are like unmarked graves, which people walk over without knowing it." This is the strongest yet of Jesus' recent condemnations of the Pharisees. It started because Jesus did not rinse his hands before eating according to a man-made tradition of ceremonial cleanness. The regulations themselves were not usually the problem. There may have been 39 different prohibitions developed for the Sabbath, but those restrictions themselves were not necessarily bad. Unfortunately, the Pharisees turned devotion into pride and legalism. Instead of following their own extra-biblical rules in worship to God, they used them to earn praise from other Jews. They enforced burdensome regulations on others. In addition, they used their rules to commit injustice, going as far as to steal the homes of widows. On the outside, the religious teachers look holy. In fact, Jesus says, "For I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven," Matthew 5:20. But it's all exterior, for show, without substance. On the inside, they are full of greed and wickedness, Luke 11:39. Jesus confronts hypocrisy. According to the Mosaic law, walking over a grave doesn't make someone unclean. Touching a dead person makes someone unclean for a week, Numbers 19:16. The people don't know that in their hearts, the Pharisees are spiritually dead. Those who follow them are in danger of becoming twice as much a child of hell as the Pharisees, themselves,